Thank you, Tom. All this build-up. Here's the world, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to introduce you to the world's greatest square dance caller, the man who needs no introduction at all, and he gets up there and bombs. So we have paper and pencil out there because we decided, in this case, we were going to try to do some handouts. The handouts that we were going to present to you were actually pieces of articles that I'd written for American Square Dance Magazine. Show of hands, anybody here ever hear or read American Square Dance Magazine? One or two. Okay, they're still active, and I write a monthly review for them. It is a music review along with an opinion piece. And opinions, well, everybody's got them, and some people have more than one. I tend to base my opinion pieces on one thing and one thing alone. Well, let me amend that. Two things. Number one, it has to be a positive piece. Anybody can be negative, and often anybody is negative. And so having said that, I try to keep it on the positive side. Number two, I approach it from the standpoint of nothing I write about, nothing I'm going to talk to you here today about is theoretical. It is based exactly on my own first-hand experiences. Anybody can talk theory. I can tell you how it could be great if you would call to 100 squares and here's how you're going to do it, blah, 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 and maybe I've never called to 100 squares. In which case you look at me and say, well, this guy is believable or not believable. I prefer to be believable and keep myself on the believable side. Anything we discuss here today is from a actually done standpoint. So if at any point you have a question on anything that I'm putting forward to you, please feel free to ask your questions. All right? The topic today, oh, here we go. We're making some adjustments. Am I loud?
Yeah, that's all right, fixing it.
Okay.
You're good.
Am I good?
Yeah.
Hope to be better than good.
Now you're excellent.
Ah, very good. So, Tom, pardon me. No, it's my broker. The topic that we were discussing today, Tom mentioned to me about discussing music. And I said, gosh, you know, music is wonderful. I feel like a one-trick pony. I think I talked to you kids about music last year.
You did?
I did.
A little bit.
A little bit, yeah. And I happen to be in the music production side of things, and that's probably why it feels like I become your music buddy, so to speak. But we're going to expand the conversation into also a bit of choreography. And we're going to expand that even further into things like showmanship. And of course, if you've ever sat through one of my talks, you know that I also like to talk about philosophy. And part of the philosophy today is going to be tying into both music and choreography. And it's going to probably deal with what we don't really talk about in square dancing today, which is customer service. Customer service. Oh, here you go. Please silence your cell phones. He says as his cell phone was ringing in the background. So, starting with where we love cell phones.
I thought I turned it off when you turned yours off.
I didn't turn mine off. I just pushed the call to voicemail, so it'll probably ring again. In fact, as I'm talking to you, let me silence my cell phone. Very good. I wrote this series of articles for American Square Dance Magazine on change and how change is inevitable. And we've all heard that, and it sounds like a lot of platitudes, but it's more than just simple words. I wrote it in a three-part article. The first part talked about how change is not only inevitable, but is actually traceable to what we already have in square dancing. Anybody who has ever been in square dancing for any length of time may not believe that change is credible and possible in our activity, because it seems like we're locked into doing things one way, and so many times we hear the same sentiment from people. We've always done it this way, and therefore we're not going to do it another way. I'm here to challenge that way of thinking, and the best way I can think of to challenge any type of thinking is through facts. Facts are irrefutable. Factually speaking, square dancing was a very closed activity. You can trace it back to the 1930s and 40s and into the 50s, where it was limited to a certain racial group, a certain group that fell within a marriage status, and in certain cases, a certain religious group. And certain other groups who were from a different race were excluded, not allowed. If you were from a different marital status, for example, single, oh, heaven forbid, you were not allowed to join in square dance classes. And if you were from a different religious group, you were not allowed to join in. We don't have that today. It changed. Sentiment of this world changed, and perhaps that's why square dancing changed. Perhaps it changed on its own. But it is evidence that today we have singles in square dancing. We have all races represented in square dancing. Not only in square dancing, but in our square dance leadership. And we have all religions represented within our square dance. Not only all religions, but even those who choose not to have a religion. So we have that as evidence of change. To say that we cannot change is not true. Further fact number 2, as I put down in my article at one point, how we can show that square dancing has changed and how we are capable of change. Square dancing used to be by memorized patterns. Everything was done that if the caller said, this tip we're going to do birdie in the cage, the dancers pretty much knew the dance. So much so that if the caller lost his place, the dancers often went ahead and danced it without the caller. The caller was incidental. Now that type of square dancing still exists today, old-time square dancing, and a lot of the old-time square dancing is tied into a lot of modern contra groups today. So it's not to say that that has gone away, but modern square dancing, which we practice today, has changed. We've gone away from that. Whereas at one time the focus of square dancing and for dancers was the band. Now the focus of the square dance is the caller. If you want to see what square dancing was like before we changed, go to a contra dance. Go to a contra dance today, where the feature is the band, where dancers follow the band, where dancers pay more attention to who's playing the music. The caller is just window dressing. Question?
I just wanted to point out that you have a contra caller here in the room.
No disrespect intended to the contra caller, but the contra caller.
It's totally true.
Thank you very much. She says what I'm saying is totally true. The dancers are looking for the band. The caller is important, but not like the square dance caller in modern Western square dancing is. In modern Western square dancing, dancers come because who's calling? Who's calling? There are 2 questions that dancers always ask when they're thinking about attending a dance. Number 1, who's calling? Number 2, what kind of refreshments are you serving?
Maybe not in that order sometimes.
Maybe not in that order. That's absolutely true. I'll tell you a true story within our own market in Southern California, Orange County. And a buddy of mine and I were calling a dance on the same night, about maybe 15-minute drive apart from each other. And as I got to my dance, and we had a good-sized dance, we had maybe about 18 squares, and I think my buddy had about 18 squares, so we both came out about right. It was interesting, the club president came to me and she said, "You'll never believe the phone call I had today." And I said, "Do tell." She says, "The people were calling because they wanted to know what refreshments we were serving. Because they knew it was you calling here, and this fellow calling here, and they said, we like them both. So the determining factor will be what you are serving for refreshments." Fortunately, my club was serving better refreshments. But that is another evidence of how we have changed, how we have evolved. Okay? We've evolved in music as well. If you think that we've just gone from boom chuck to a lot of the shuffle rhythms and modern stuff, that's not true. You can go further back in square dancing, and a lot of the live bands played mostly a jig rhythm, a 6/8. Most of that music was played in a 6/8 rhythm. That then evolved into the boom chucky. A lot of our square dance music originally was done very strongly phrased, which you find today with contrabands. Contrabands. Bands who play for contra dances. All right? Meaning that the melody, the tune is very strong. So if it were being played like, Coming Round the Mountain When They Come, then that tune was very prevalent. Now, our modern Western square dancing got away from that when we got away from memorized patterns, when we started going to hash calling, where we knew more than the dancers, where the dancers had no idea what was coming next. We, as a music, started to move into this boom chup, boom chup, boom chup, boom chup, boom chup, boom chup, and it had no or very little phrasing to it. Music just kind of became window dressing. Okay? That has now evolved because now we've kind of gone back, we've kind of gone full cycle. And in many of our dances, especially a show of hands, how many are using a computer for music at your dances? The majority, the majority. So you probably experienced some of the newer pieces of music. A lot of the newer pieces of music have gone back to strong musical phrasing, driving it. We've gone away from the simple boom chuck, boom chuck, boom chuck. And so we're going through a cycle again, where we went from the very strongly phrase-driven 6/8, we went to more of what I would call kind of like a mishmash boom chucky thing that went through the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. And now here we are, we're back to a very strongly phrased piece of music. And we've gone now to shuffle rhythms, 4/4. So before I don't want anybody's eyes to gloss over when we talk about rhythms. But rhythms are a big thing that we do in square dancing. And whether you do it on purpose or not, it doesn't make a difference. You still impact the dancers by the rhythms you play. A boom chuck is that boom chuck, boom, you have the bass beat playing on the down step, where everybody sets their foot on the boom. And the chuck is nothing more than usually something played on a hi-hat, which gives the people a sense of lifting their foot, versus the shuffle rhythm, which is simply the bass beat. It tells you where to step. It tells you where to step. If I were to give you a classic example of a shuffle rhythm, it would be Summer Sounds on the old McGregor. Listen to the music of the carousel, the ting-a-ling-a-ling of the ice cream bell. It was one of the very early versions of a shuffle rhythm, which told you where to set your foot, and it was set at about 124 beats per minute, which is very slow. It's slow today, and it was slower for 1966 when it first came out. And so it was a very different kind of piece of music, and a lot of callers said, "Ooh, this is pretty cool." Dancers liked it because at that time, most of the music was boom chuck, boom chuck, boom chuck, played at about 130, 132 beats a minute. So it's very quick, very fast, very choppy, very lively. And then all of a sudden, Summer Sounds comes out, and it's and all of a sudden the dancer said, "Wow, this is pretty cool. We can kind of relax." Well, that rhythm is prevalent today, but it's not played at that 124. A lot of our modern music is played around 126. 126, 124, that range of beats per minute is comfortable. Anything faster than 126 is like taking Summer Sounds. Do you have Summer Sounds here in your record collection?
Might.
Would you mind taking a look and see if you've got Summer Sounds? Because that would be a great illustration.
Which box I have.
The point that we're going to make here, if he has Summer Sounds, I'm going to make the point whether he has it or not. You might have Summer Sounds on your computer too. The faster that you drive a shuffle rhythm, you will drive dancers off of the beat. Very simply put. So it's not that you're going to expect the dancers to dance faster. If they can do a Summer Sounds at this step, and you want them to dance this step, they might do it for a little while, but guess what? They're going to get tired, and they're going to start doing this. Walking, strolling, one beat, one step for every other beat of music. Have you ever watched dancers? You got it. All right. Does that speed up? Can you speed this up?
That's the speed that we recorded at.
I'm going to be able to speed it up.
Oh, I can do that. I can do that.
Silver label, black label. All right, so Dick has Summer Sounds.
He's doing nothing for my singing halls.
Even at that speed, for a lot of today's dancers, that's if you use the original choreography, start through, pass through, circle around the track.
No.
That's a zippy for people.
So that'll come. That's a very good question and a very good point. That it's a little bit fast for a lot of dancers today. That almost falls under the category of choreography. And if I don't remember to come back to that, will you remind me when we get into that segment of today's discussion on choreography? Because I do definitely want to come back and address that and choreography matching into it. And, all right, so this is Summer Sounds.
126.
126. Bring it up to 128. Bring it up to 130. Bring it up to 132. Can you keep moving that fast? Guess what you do?
There you go.
The dancers have fallen off the beat because it's too fast to dance with. Thank you, Dave.
Yep.
Thank you, Tom, for looking. I appreciate that.
My dancers are sitting down.
Your dancers are sitting down. That's right. We all have that same thing. We don't really pay attention to why they do that. We just. I had a caller say to me. He says, "You know, the dancers today, they just kind of stroll around." And I thought, I'm not seeing that. I went to his dance. I saw it. And I talked to him later on. I said, I saw what you're talking about, man. They're strolling around. He says, yeah, I don't know why they're doing it. He says, my dance has gotten so lazy. I said, could I tell you something? I said, I think you're playing your music a little fast. And he was just could not believe what I was telling him. How could I, the caller, be wrong? Lord and master of everything square dance, how could I be wrong? But guess what? When he came back, and I think it might have been 4 months later, he came back, he said, you know, you were right. He said, I didn't want to believe it, but I slowed it down, and all of a sudden the dancers are standing and dancing on the beat of the music. So, going back to the topic of change just for a second now, because I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole. Change is, and what we did not talk about in the article, but I will tell you this, is not a one-way street. It does not mean that we forsake all things that we used to do and no longer do it. Now, there are some things that we will. For example, does anybody here want to give them their cell phone? And when you get stuck in the rain on the side of the road, walk to a payphone? No. Does anybody want to give up their car they're driving and perhaps go back and drive your 62 Nova?
Hey, it was a good car.
It was a great car. Would you like to drive it? I had a 62 Nova. I'm sure it has gone to the great car graveyard in the sky. I don't want to drive that car again. It was a great car, but it doesn't have the comfort. It didn't have the head support. It didn't have the support that we all come to expect. It didn't start every time you went to turn the key. Remember keys? So that being said, we know that there are some things we refused that we're going to give up. We want that change. We want to keep our microwave oven. We want to keep our new car. We want to keep our new watch. But there are some cases where, you know, like I'll say for me personally, I used to go to a barber, and then I stopped going when I was in my 20s and went to a hairstylist. You know, coiffed it, made it look good. Well, here about 7 years ago, I said, you know what? I miss the haircuts. I miss having the fade. And so I started going back to a barber, and I prefer being with a barber shop now. There's something to it. That's for me telling me that I don't have to be so stubborn to say, well, I've only gone one way. I'm never going back to a barber shop. And the same thing goes for us in square dance music. If I used records, and we all did, anybody here not use records? Anybody? Not? You didn't? You're young. Young lady here, I've never used records. What are those things you speak of? But the records, most of the records were done in a boom chuck rhythm because that was the fashion from about the 1960s all the way through the 1990s. And so every time you pick up a record, I'm going to say that probably 85% of the records you pick up are going to boom chuck, boom chuck, boom chuck, boom chuck. And it had a lot of live instruments, and it was mostly country music driven because most of the record producers were going for the country sound. Very few labels got away from that. Even when they did rock pieces like Rocking in Rosalie's Boat, it was played with guitars and banjos, steel guitar. It was played with a country sound to it because that's what was driving square dancing at the time. I think that has a good place in today's market. I think it has a great place because anything else, you can overdo something, okay? So for example, I want to play a few musical pieces for you. This is a typical example of what is considered an average hoedown today, in today's market. So let me see if I can get this queued up, play it. This is an average hoedown. There's nothing remarkable about it. Now I'm down to 5% battery. Would you do me a favor? I've got a charger there. Nothing like being prepared. Boom, 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 boom. It's a little fast too. It feels a little fast to me. This is another typical shuffle rhythm that you find in today's music. Boom, 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 boom. Just kind of nice rolling along. Typical kind of how. Am I right? When you go to when you've been to Wasco, a lot of the callers, this is the kind of music they're using. Dick, you are awesome. Thank you so much. Plug my computer in before it goes down. And here's another example. I heard something crashing behind me. Wasn't mine, was it?
All the records were
All the records went down?
I took them all out.
Okay. Let me tell you a story about how you can prank another caller with records. Okay.
Much better.
Okay. Another 4/4 piece of rhythm, another shuffle rhythm. You get the feeling, did you notice one thing that I've noticed here? It all sounds the same. It all sounds the same. And question, yeah.
Although they're very popular with dancers, and it's exactly what you hear at festivals, everything you played so far, I hate.
Okay.
Personally, and I'd like to learn more about why.
Well, why you hate it?
Yes. more about what it is.
Did you not get enough hugs as a child? I don't know why you hate that kind of music.
You're probably going to show some other stuff
So, buddy,
that's different.
Chris is the one that inherited all the Butch records.
Okay, all right.
I thought fever, you know?
Fever.
Fever?
Yeah, well, there is a shuffle rhythm to it on rhythm, but the other ones are all done in boom shuffle. So I'll come back to that, what you're talking about in just a second. I think that what we were talking about here is that that's a lot of one thing, and I fell into that when I got into a lot of shuffle rhythms and a lot of digital music. That became a large driving part of my musical program when I would go out to a dance. But as we were talking about how it's good to not only look at what we've got now, but go back and accent it with things that we used to do in the past. And so if I were doing just this kind of music, which you hate, and I might be able to address that for you later. This is what I would consider a driving shuffle rhythm. Unlike what you would have with summer sounds, which is very laid back, this is it's driving. It's pushing the people. And if it's too fast, it's pushing them off the beat, or you're pushing them into the ground. It's a march. It's a march. At its very base, march, 2, 3, putt, 2, 3, turn, putt, 2, 3, march, march, march. By contrast, and this is where we have to remember when we're coming in musically at a square dance level, is contrast, because too much of one thing, it's like if the only seasoning you have is salt, as a cook, everything's going to be tasting salty. So you have to have some other seasoning, something else besides just salt. So I like to contrast it, come up with the next tip and do something like this piece of music. That's a little fast. But that's your boom, chuck, boom, chuck. You can feel the boom, 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 but it's not by emphasizing the chuck part of it with a hi-hat or snare. It's not driving you into the ground. It gives you a sense of lift. So you have a sense of a step, lift, step, lift, step, lift, rather than driving you into the ground. Musically, whereas the other piece was pretty much all computers. It's all keyboard driven. A lot of computerized sounds, maybe a little bit of guitar. This has got a ton of live musicians. You've got a fiddler, guitarist, you've got drum, you've got kick drum, you've got snare, you've got a bass player, you've got a rhythm guitar player here. There's a lot of things happening in the background. So it gives you that little bit of contrast, which we tend to lose if we do only one thing. I'm going to give you 2 more examples, and then I'm going to move on with this a little bit further. Another piece of music that I might use as a contrast piece. That, by the way, is called Giddy Up Sam. That's going to be a hoedown coming out soon. I love this old piece. I love this piece. And I love using it with the dancers. And I think the dancers like it. Because if they're used to hearing that boom, 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 all of a sudden they're hearing this. And it feels completely different than what they're used to doing. And I've got another old piece, that's called Daisetta. This is another old piece that I love.
What's this one called?
That's called Daisetta. D-A-I-S-E-T-T-A. It was on Blue Star, it's on Rawhide now. It's a 99-cent hoedown. Tell them about it, Dick. This is called Trail Ride.
Maybe just because of the orchestration, it reminds me a lot of Up Jump the Devil.
Love this. Banjo, fiddle, guitar, piano. It's all there. It's very country. Now, taken as a whole, you got this piece, and then you've got this piece. And then you have this piece. Now, if that's all I did in my program, there again, it's going to sound just as bad as if all I did was shuffle rhythm. So if you're using only records, and I know many still are, that's cool, but be sure you can throw in some other form of a rhythm other than boom chuck, boom chuck, boom chuck, boom chuck. Otherwise it becomes a single seasoning in your dances. Now, part of where I'm going to go with this conversation today, and with Tom and I were discussing this, I asked a question earlier, I said, how many of you guys and gals are club callers or teach for a club? Just about everybody? Am I right? Just about everybody. So that's a much different burden that falls on you than, let's say, the guy who gets kind of like me, who kind of wanders in today and does 1-2 hour dance and wanders on to a different town. But bear in mind, remember I said everything I'm going to talk to you about is said from actual practice. I'm a club caller. I'm a club teacher. I call for a club right there in my own home area and I teach for them. And I have regular dance groups every week where we have the same people who come to see me every week. And I've done this for 40 years of my calling career. And so I understand that it's easy to have 1-2 hour dance, maybe a 3-hour dance, and just take it from one town to the next and never have to improve on it. And it's much harder to be the guy or lady who everybody sees every single week because you have to have variety. You cannot do the same dance every single week. You can. And you might be able to get away with that for a while, but then people might get tired. If you're the only game in town, you know, if your boat has a slow leak and you're the only boat in the marina, then obviously you'll still be okay. But if there are other boats that don't have leaks, you will soon be sunk and you'll be out of business. Bearing that in mind, I think the burden is greater for a club caller or the guy who's teaching, the lady who's teaching every single week in a beginner class, because you have to have a different program. So we go back to the idea of on musical changes. If you can't hear the difference in rhythm, then take the time to take your records out and use some of the examples that we've given you here today and set it down there and move to it. Don't just listen to it. Stand up and move to it and tell me if you can feel the difference. I can tell you that this piece of music here feels like a brisk walk. It feels brisk, but it's a walk. It's a nice, moving piece of music. I can tell you from a feel standpoint that if you get into something like the other one we played here, this is going to feel more of a march rhythm. It's your shuffle. And so we have that march, 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 march. One feels like a brisk walk, and this feels more like you're marching. And if you were to get into and really start to dig into the stuff, you would get into things like we call jig rhythms, modified 6/8 rhythms. And they feel completely different. I'll give you an example of that here. Modified, this is jig rhythm. It's neither boom shuffle. You can't call it like a boom shuffle. You can't call it like a shuffle. And the feeling, all of a sudden your knees start to bend. And you watch the dancers and their whole body starts to move. And it's a completely different feel. You can feel the difference. And if you can feel the difference, the dancers can feel the difference. And you've now made your job one step easier. Because if you think that variety is going to come to you only through choreography, then you've become the one-trick pony. That means you're relying on your own talent, your individual God-given talent, every single week, every single dance, to carry you through that dance. That's it. And if your talent lets you down, if you had a bad day at work, if the doctors change your meds, if you got into a fuss or fight with somebody on the way to the dance, guess what? Your talent is not going to carry you. You're going to lose your corner. If you're a sight caller, you're going to not remember what you're supposed to do. Your material may be brilliant on paper, and as soon as it goes out into the wild, it's... How many of you have ever gone into a dance with brilliant material that was so poorly received? Anybody besides me? I've written stuff that I thought was absolutely brilliant, and I had this one dancer come to me. He said, "You remind me of the playwright who was asked about his recent play. He said it was a great play that was most poorly received by the audience." I thought he was absolutely right. It was a brilliant piece of choreography. It was a brilliant tip, and the dancers hated every freaking minute of it. And it wasn't for any reason that I could ever put my finger on, except to say, don't do that again. But guess what? I have more than just that one tool in my toolbox. I've got music to fall back on. So if I bombed this tip with my material, not that I lost my corner, heaven forbid. I got the corner every single time. I got it back to home every single time. It just wasn't something that the dancers enjoyed. That's okay. Next tip, I guarantee you I'm going to come back on with a piece of music that's going to move them, because then I know I've already won the battle. Then all I have to do is simply call. All I have to do is call. If you have good music, all you have to do is call. If you don't know what kind of music you have, you better be a really good caller. Because that means all that's going to carry your tip is you. And if you are not that good this tip, then your tip is not that good this tip. And I hate to be brutal about it, but that's where it comes from. I used to be the guy who thrived on choreography. I was the guy who drove my whole dance on choreography. And I need to tell you, I started recording my dances and listening to it. And I thought, dang, how many swing throughs can one caller call in one evening? I found out. I listened to my own recording. And that's because everything I was doing was choreography driven. Back off of it. Put some good music on. Use my memory a little bit. Go back and remember some of the good modules that we use. Put some new modules down on paper. Move the people to an opposite lady line. Move them into a right-hand lady line. Do some stretch sight calling for them. Move them around, bring them right back to the exact same place, and resolve it as I would all the way out to a corner. Alaman left. They never saw the corner coming. The music is jamming away. I won. I won. And I didn't have to work that hard. I didn't have to work that hard as if I were trying to put together a quarter tag and make it flow, which is a different story, which we will get to. Our newest mainstream call. So to kind of talk a little bit further on the music side, the thing too that everything we're talking about in rhythms is done by feel. And if you go by feel, you have to also bear in mind that the feel has to be there as you go from patter to singing call. Now, I'm going to assume that all of you do singing calls at classes too. Am I right? My class I called on Thursday night, I use a singing call on every one but the last tip. Now bear in mind, I don't run my patterns long. My pattern is capped at 6 to 7 minutes. And if I'm teaching, that includes the teach. So if my teach takes me 3 minutes, my pattern is 3 minutes. I don't want the people up on the floor a long time. It's just silly because you've lost their attention. If you think you can, I learned a long time ago, I cannot keep people on the floor for 20 minutes and expect them to still like me. Most of them have already passed that point and have gone into the dislike side of it. And if you kept them on the floor for 30, I know some guys who keep dancers on the floor for 45-minute long tips.
Oh my God.
And it's the same piece of music playing in the background the entire time. If this is your music that you're playing, can you listen to this for 45 minutes? Could you listen to this for 30 minutes?
Good music, but not that one.
It's good music, but it's not that good. So if I can play that, and I can play that for about 6 minutes, if I'm not teaching, 6-minute tip, then we're going to throw in this nice little singing call. But we're going to make sure that singing call contrasts, because if it doesn't contrast, in my opinion, it conflicts. So let me see, I've written some examples down here. If I can just read my writing.
E-glasses?
No, I have 20/30 vision. Oh, I see, I think. Okay, yeah. All right, so let me give you a couple of examples of what I call a conflict. And then I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what I call a contrast, and to kind of point it out. Now, a conflict is when you have a piece of music, and both of these could be great pieces of music. This is your favorite shuffle rhythm. You probably dislike it because it's
very driving.
Driving.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this music is driving. This music has a great purpose. If I probably will walk on the stage in the Plus Hall in Waska on that first tip, and this is a piece of music I'm going to put on. Because it's going to grab their attention. They're going, yeah, okay, we're dancing. And you can hear there's a melody playing here too. You can hear, what's the name of the tune? Moni Moni. Moni Moni Blues. You can't sing it. It's too high. Yeah, unless you're taking an octave down, you couldn't be singing it. You'd have to come down an octave. So if that's my pattern, then by all means, my singing call had better be a nice little contrast to it, because otherwise it's going to come out sounding something like, like this. Those two don't sound good together. They don't sound good together. Does anybody disagree with me? They don't sound good together, going back to back. Because I went from a very driving piece of music with a very modern feel to it, a tune, Moni Moni, which is associated most folks with the 1960s and into the 1970s, and then suddenly I crossed over into this very old-fashioned country piece of music. Good music. Good music. When My Blue Moon Turns to Gold Again, 1950-something or other?
No, we're further back.
From 1940-something. So you see, I've crossed in many regards into some place where they don't jive. I've gone from playing something from a very modern 1960s feel to a 1940s feel. I've gone from a shuffle rhythm to a boom chucky rhythm. The dancers are used to being driven, then suddenly they've got this kind of funky feel. I have made this mistake sometimes, not on back-to-back pattern or singing call, but sometimes on a back-to-back pattern. For example, where I have an A2 group, and we, if I finish, say, the A2 tip with a very modern piece like Moni Moni, and then turn around the next tip and put on something like that Giddy Up Sam on the next pattern, and somebody say, oh, don't do that again. Well, thank you. I didn't take umbrage to it, because number one, they were right, and number two, it shows they were listening. It shows that they're actually appreciating the kind of music that I'm playing in the background, versus nobody cares, because nobody can tell the difference between one piece of music to the other piece of music. If your dancers can't tell the difference, it's probably because you're not featuring it. Or maybe you're using the same kind of music, tip after tip after tip after tip. You can do that. You can use that kind of piece of music, tip after tip after tip, where it has no melody, it has no feel, it's just boom, chip, boom, chip, boom, chip, boom, chip, boom, chip. In which case you can just probably get away with just a rhythm track and save yourself money. Just buy one rhythm track and you're good to go. Question?
Well, maybe you can explain how you can elaborate or explain this to me.
Sure.
Well, first of all, I'll just say I have really good success with the music that I use, but I haven't thought about it like you're describing it. So I mean, I guess I have good intuition, but I'm learning a lot here. So this is great. And so the most of the pattern music that I use is not pattern records. It's mostly singing calls that I use as patterns instead, and a lot of it might be what you were saying earlier with the nice blend of all different instruments. You know, a much richer orchestration, and then also it usually isn't the certain kind of driving stuff. But what's up with that? Why does that work?
I'm going to have to get into your head, boy. How much is my contract paying me on this? I'm a psychology major now.
That's scary. But But I mean,
I think that
you know the difference between sing call music and pattern music, obviously.
So-
So why is it that trick works? What's going on there?
I think I have a solution to what you're talking about, and I'm going to deviate from what I was talking about just for a second and address what you're talking about here. I think you are really involved in that you have your likes that comes across, your particular like, and so you enjoy having a strong melody playing. For example, if this were playing in the background like this, you might consider this a very good hoedown.
It's definitely much better than the one that doesn't have. Yeah.
Yeah. You enjoy the melody playing in the background. You probably enjoy that. You probably enjoy a particular kind of melody. You probably enjoy a particular a genre of music. Maybe if I'm just kind of guessing.
A lot of it leans in a certain direction. I mean,
Towards
I have some
the
variety, but it's
either country or jazz.
right, jazzy. Yeah.
Jazzy. All right, so there you go. Hey, I'm on a roll now. All right. So you probably also lean towards instrumentation, where there's a lot of
Clarinets and
horns,
pianos, yeah.
Right? There you go. Clarinets, pianos, saxophone. That's
Organ too, right? The
organ.
jazz
That's
organ.
cool. And jazz piano, right? So, for example, if I were to put on a piece like, let me put this piece on. Huh? I even have it. Maybe I took it out of my record box. Oh, here it is.
Next time I have the couch here too.
I get a lot of really good feedback from the dancers. They come up all the time like, oh, you love music, you love it. But if I could understand more about why,
More about why.
I
So,
can manipulate it.
what does this music do for you? Kind of dig it, don't you?
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Found a New Baby or something.
Yeah, found the baby. Yeah. So I have. So if to answer your question, I personally like things that are in a minor chord. I like things like
Nice.
Misty, and you know, those kinds of melodies, Dancing Moon, and those kinds of those things that go to a minor chord where you can get a nice rolling note on it.
The most minor one I can think of off the top of my head is Someone Took the Sweetness,
There you go.
which starts right out with a clang. You know.
So I remember a caller many years back. We were both beginner callers at the time. So let me tell you the story to kind of tie in with this. We were both beginner callers, and he loved the ballads. He loved that, and the ballads he loved were like, I'm getting good at thinking of you, could be the best at being blue. You know, a lot of those very sad ballads. And he sang them beautifully, and his patter was excellent, and the dancers left his dance halfway through every single dance. And he couldn't figure out why. It's because they were so sad.
Oh.
They were so sad. Everything he sang was sad. And if I played only what I liked, he played what he liked. If I played only what I liked, Misty and all those minors, it would probably drive the people out the door even earlier than that, because minors tend to drive people down.
Makes you feel bad.
Yeah, so here's a working example of a minor. Let's see if I can get this to play now. Dee-dum. Does that play? I think this will play. This kind of music all night long. One tip after another. I love it.
I couldn't do it.
I dig this. I dig the chord progression on this, man. I dig the fact that the steel has a haunting feel to it. But it would kill my dance. And so I have to, so the short answer to your question is you like that kind of music. That's why you're driven to it.
It's not just that. I'm just flipping through here
Okay.
trying to guess what it is that's.
Well, I was going to say the longer answer to it is that that you'll have to force yourself to try other pieces that you are not necessarily comfortable with. Now, that does not mean that you should do something that is completely outside of your wheelhouse. I have my limits. For example, I don't care for country music.
Lightning bolt.
Lightning bolts. Now, I love the country music that came out through the 1970s, because when I was a kid in the 70s, I listened to George Strait and Tammy Wynette. I love that. I love those songs. And a lot of them had those little kind of minor twisting little harmony lines. Love that. Yeah, there she's got that ease. And you know, that was that. I love that kind of
I
sound.
think it's a little bit the same with me, because I'll play the largely American songbook, jazzy stuff I like, but then I make sure it's like, oh well, it's time for a country
It's
one. Let me
time
dig
for
out a
that. That's
country
right.
one
So I don't care for country, but I'll force myself to play something that's got a country piece. That Wagon Wheel is a good example. I don't really care for Wagon Wheel. I don't like the Wagon Wheel tune, even though it's not really country. It was written by Bob Dylan. But it's so closely associated with country because you have Darius Rucker, who is Hootie and the Blowfish, for God's sake. He's not a country singer who's singing it and is big in the country. So the round dancers dig Wagon Wheel. So because I cue the rounds at my group on once a week, I play Wagon Wheel. 2 strikes against it. Number 1, it's country. Number 2, it's a 2-step. But I force myself to play it because the dancers like it. And we're going to use a Wagon Wheel singing call once every 2 or 3 months. And I'll do one country song maybe once every 2 weeks because the dancers like it. And so the long answer is, I think that you and I have the same thing. We both enjoy a particular genre and a particular style of music, but we have to force ourselves to go out of that. And so even though you don't like the shuffle rhythm, I would suggest to you to find something that's not as driving. And may I offer a couple of suggestions? Not every shuffle rhythm is driving, although many are. Not everyone is, okay? And not all of them are very modern in their orchestration. This is not as driving as some of the other ones are because the instrumentation is a little simpler. You have pretty much a fiddle and a little bit of piano. The violin, because it's being played as a violin, not as a fiddle.
We're in our minor key.
A little bit of minor key, yeah. It's not as driving. It's not as shoving something into the dancer's face, so to speak. I like this when I'm calling in the advanced, when I was over at Waska, and I use this a lot in the advanced and challenge hall. This is a great dance feel to it, mostly in the advanced hall. It has a nice feel to it without sending the dancers into heart palpitations.
Something good for teaching.
Something good for teaching. It has enough of a melody line playing, not recognizable, but I know where the fiddle is, so that as I'm calling along, I can call around the fiddle, so I can hit things like, you know, do a motivate. And here we go, 1, 2, 3, 4. When you're done, do a scoot and weave. And you can do your single wheels, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm still calling, doing all my material, blah, blah, blah. Pass through right roll, and a right and left grand.
What's that called?
This is called Honeycomb Fiddler. And you see, once I hit the right and left grand, I knew that the fiddle would disappear and the piano would come out. And the dancers heard that. And so, when we were talking about a caller earlier, you know, when I'm calling, I very seldom mess with the volume. I mess with the tone. If I want the piano to come out, I'm going to bring that tone, the treble up just a tad, because I want that piano heard, especially if I'm coming out. Now, when the fiddle's playing, I want that treble down, because otherwise, it's going to compete with me for the dancer's attention. This is one example. I'm going to give you another example, which is it's pretty much the same tune with different instruments. Give me a second now. I'm trying to remember the name of it now. Ah, here it is. Got it, sorry. Much the same melody.
To my Thursday night. There's a couple squares.
There won't be a fiddle in here, or violin really, but there is it's a banjo. Very friendly piece of music. It's still a shuffle, but it's not a really in-their-face driving rhythm. Again, something that I would probably use on a teaching tip. It's got piano. So if you know where, so as you learn as you learn a piece of music, you learn where the piano comes in, the banjo comes in, and you start to play around it. So you can say, do a head square through 4. There's the banjo. I knew the banjo was coming in there, and I knew the banjo was going to come in with a little bit more of a drum crash. They're going to have a little bit more percussion on that, and I know when the banjo will fall away and they're going to go back into a piano. They're still going to play banjo. In fact, the banjo, he kind of doubles up into some places, so it becomes a little bit more interesting. Musically, it's entertaining without overpowering me. Pass through and a right and left grand. Piano.
What's the name of that one?
This is called Thumping Banjo. They're all on Blue Star. What a coincidence. I'm not going to play only Blue Star music, but I have, so let me make a note of it, because some folks do read my monthly reviews, and they know that when I talk about music, if I'm featuring in the article, I tend to feature my own. Not out of a sense of self-serving, but because I receive comp music from almost all the producers. And if I take and say, I love this particular producer's music, it's going to hurt the other producer's feelings. And so I don't then talk about anybody else's music in my article except for my own, because then they say, oh, he's just a self-serving individual. I can live with that versus living with them saying, oh, how come he's using Scott Bennett's music and not mine? How come he's using Wade Driver's music and not mine? How come he's talking about so-and-so's music and not mine? Okay, so clear the air with that. That's why I tend to feature my music. Also, because I know my music inside and out.
Yeah, just download it.
Now, going back to the idea on contrast, because we talked about the contrast earlier, but I'm going to use that little, when my blue moon turns to gold again. I'll cue that up again as my singing call. And I know, by the way, I program everything almost, I program my rhythms. Did anybody here program their dances? Yeah. Okay? So, back in the old days, we used to program the dances and say, I remember as a beginner caller, I used to set down exactly what I was going to use for a hoedown, and exactly what I was going to use for singing call, and exactly what I was going to use for material. And I got away from that many, many years ago, and quite a few years ago, I got into programming my dance by rhythm. And so I say, first tip, shuffle. Because it's an easy rhythm, it gets their attention, it gets them going, it motivates them. It can drive, but not, it depends upon what my setting is. If I were on the main hall at 8 o'clock, I'm going to drive. Because guess what? The people that walked in there, they're already amped. They're ready to go. The worst thing I can do is put on summer sounds. You know, ladies and gentlemen, here's the greatest caller in the world. Here's, ladies and gentlemen, here's Buddy Weaver, and he puts on, and there goes the whole dance right down, because everybody's amped and they're ready to go, and the worst thing you can do is bring them down off that. Better to play on what they're expecting. If they come into the beginner lessons, they're not necessarily expecting to be driven up the wall, but they would probably enjoy something more like that, a thumping banjo or the honeycomb fiddler piece, because it has nice solid feel to it without driving them up the wall, but without driving them the mood down, because they're all amped up. I believe in taking what you've got and playing with it. I really don't want to mess with the people too much. Does that make sense? People come in with the expectation of having a good time. Far be it from me to ruin that. Okay? Yeah, question.
Can you talk about the difference between synthesized music and real instruments music?
Okay. Difference between synthesized versus real instruments. So each plays its own part. The biggest difference that I can tell you from a musical standpoint is that the music we put out today has a more consistent beat to it. And that's because we don't use live drummers anymore. All of our percussion is done on a computer. It's done from samples. In other words, somebody played the drum once, it was recorded, and it's set. And the same thing goes for kick drum, and it goes for snare. Now, that being said, I can show you, you see how this is all, can everybody see this little graphic up here on the computer? This is Tom, Dick rather, recording today's today's session. And what you see here is the visual representation of an audio. It's my voice shown here. And when you see the same thing with music, watch what happens when you play the piece of music here. Can everybody see these highs and lows visual? it's spiking upwards is a visual representation of the downbeat, of the boom, 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 steady dance beat. That's the drummer, that's the bass player. They're hitting the same note, same time, boom, 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 boom. What we found with the older pieces of music, like what Dick was asking about, the difference between live instrumentation versus the more modern pieces. The older pieces use live guys, and if they had a rough night the night before, they're boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. It reminded me like the old golf cart where the battery was going on and you boom, 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 boom. And so in many cases where we've taken that piece of music, we have to fix that. Further, the older instrumentation had a different recording capability. And to point that out, I was telling this to Tom earlier, I'm helping a buddy of mine where we are revitalizing his old record label. It was a label that came up back in the 1960s, and we're putting it back together again. And so he sent me all the studio tapes from 1964. You open the box and you can smell 1964 all over this. I've forgotten what 1964 smells like. But when you play it, you can know immediately that rather than each individual instrument being mic'd, they mic'd the room. And so they would do numerous takes. And I thought, why are they doing the same take on the same song? And they're not really changing the way they play it. And I finally listened to it and I realized that they're moving the microphone. Because this take, they were too close to the bass player. And so everyone would go, boom, boom, boom. It had that distorting factor because the bass was coming through so strong on the microphone. So the next time they moved the mic over here, and then all of a sudden,
It's still recording.
okay, all of a sudden you could get over here and it was a lot less bass. But maybe the fiddler was too close to the mic this time. Maybe the mic is over here and he's fiddling and it's getting too loud. They move the mic over here. We finally got the mix that we like. Okay, so that's the other part of it, why we've changed. So modern music. Now, having said all that, if I had to choose live pickers for a piece of music, I'm going to choose live pickers off of something that's been done this century. Because I know the rhythm is consistent. It wasn't done by a drummer who came in with a hangover. I know that they mic'd each individual instrument. They probably did it in multiple sessions, so they didn't have everybody standing in the room and jockeying for position. Because we've seen that, where you have all the musicians in one room, and guess what? The fiddler wants to be heard, so he keeps walking up to the microphone to get in front of the mic. And then before long, you see the rhythm guitarist come over and he pushes the fiddler back with his guitar, and the fiddler goes back, and after a while, here comes that fiddler. He walks right back up to the microphone because he wants to be heard. We've seen this in live sessions. You don't have that anymore. So if I were to compare something that was done before to something that's done today, indulge me for a second while I just pull up a few examples of something that would have been done. Let's see here. So this would have been, I'm trying to find the oldest singing call I've got on my computer. This is pretty old. This is all live instruments. Love the piece of music.
This is my kind of thing.
Walk right back. They mic'd the room, and this was the Houston Symphony players who were doing a secret session. They were not paid union scale. The band leader of the Houston Orchestra was Dick Shannon, and he brought all his players in to play square dance music. So you've got the piano, you've got the xylophone, symphonic feel to it. That's nice, and it's got its place in today's program. But if I were really going to do something that I thought was more representative of that kind of music, I'd probably play this. I didn't touch the tone controls. Can you hear the difference? Today's instruments, today's music, we add kick drum, which is not used back in the old symphony days. The kick drum is not heard. It's felt. You can hear a kick drum. There's too much kick drum in it. We use what we call click tracks. Now, a click track used to be used to help the drummer keep time, but a click track serves another purpose. Click track serves to drive the beat to the back of the hall. And so if you don't have a click track, there are many other labels who are out there, and I shall not name them, but where you could play the piece of music. Now, Mac here, now you've called to large groups of people, and you know sometimes you can put a piece of music on where it doesn't seem like the beat doesn't go past the front row of squares. It doesn't carry to the back. And why does some pieces of music carry to the back? Why does chaparral music carry to the back of the room? Guess what? They use click tracks. They detuned the guitar, and it blended in with the downbeat, with the bass. So and that's what this has, and it has a click track playing in it, which drives the beat to the back of the room, so everybody hears it. Each instrument was individually mic'd. The rhythm is consistent at 126 beats per minute, I believe. Make a figure out of me. 128 beats per minute. Thank you very much. Go back to my first representation. First one. The beat is not as bright, is it? And if you're sitting way back there, you're probably not hearing the beat as well as you could. The beat wasn't as present. And that being said, two things on this.
That's probably why I like it. That's probably why I like it.
But remember now, well, we're serving the dancers, and if the dancers can't feel the beat, then we've done them a disservice. Now, having said all this, everybody here, I'm going to believe that everybody here has taken their records and put them onto their computer at some point. Am I right? Has anybody here not taken a record? Well, you don't even have a computer.
You have my computer up.
Your computer doesn't have anything to do with square dancing.
You can hear the beat on that more strongly, like once per measure.
Correct,
It comes around.
but if your dancers only dance on one out of every 8 measures, you'd be fine. But they need a beat for every measure. Where was I going with this? So if you've taken records and put them onto computers, many times I remember doing this when I was very early in the computer stage. We use software to remove all of the noise. It removes click tracks.
Explain
It
what
even says that on it.
You didn't realize that until after you got on the floor, though.
Correct. So the click track was we put it into the rhythm to drive the beat to the back of the hall. And so years ago, Dick Henschel, great guy, he was the owner of Hilton Audio. We sat there at a national convention, and Dick said, "Buddy, you hear things that no one else hears." I said, "You make me sound like I'm from, like I see dead people." No. I said, "Dick, let's do a little experiment." I said, "Pull up, you have Ghost Riders in the Sky." And he said, "You have Ghost Riders on your computer? Did you get it from me, or did you get it from your record?"
Probably from your record.
From the record.
Yeah.
If you have Ghost Riders, would you please pull it up? And because Ghost Riders was what Dick Henschel and I used at the time to point out what I was talking about, how a software program cannot tell the difference between noise and an instrument. It doesn't know the difference, and you can't train it. If you tell your computer, pick up shh, it's going to pick up shh. Now, if you have an instrument that's making that shh noise, that instrument will disappear. If you tell it to remove the sound of or just one, it's going to look for every single. Well, what happens when we put that in there on purpose? What happens like when chaparral music put it in there on purpose to drive the beat back? Then all of a sudden the software will take out every single.
Just point of fact, it would be possible to make software that could distinguish between those with enough resolution, because they're not going to really be, but that's not what we have.
It's not what we have, and it's not, people probably wouldn't invest that much time in it. Can you all hear this? Now, this is from, without coming from a record. You hear it? You hear it?
The slap on the bass, you mean?
It's in there. It's subtle, and it's in there. And it drives that rhythm to the back of the hall.
Now, is that something so you're saying that's something that you actually put in there?
Absolutely. We put it in there on purpose, and that's the difference
It sounds
between...
a little bit like the sound of the bass string coming back to hit the thing.
It
but
used to
it's
be
not-
done by detuning a guitar. Now we do it with a computer. The computer can generate that sound, and we put a click track on everything that we do. And most of the successful labels do it. The ones that... Most of the successful labels do it. All of the successful labels do it, yes.
How does it work?
How does what work? The click track, it's subtle. It's almost imperceptible unless you were listening for it.
Is
And
it a slap or
it's a click.
it's a click?
It's a click.
It sounds to me a little bit like it's not, but it sounds similar to the sound on an upright bass when the string comes back.
And a slap back. Or if you can imagine the clip clop of horses.
No, I don't have a problem hearing noise. I'm a click,
Yeah.
but
You shouldn't hear it obviously unless you're listening.
I intentionally go in to get rid of it. I don't.
There you go.
I don't know why it's considered. a click.
So, well, because, you don't want to get rid of it. So if you bought Ghost Riders from, let's say, from off of my website, because that's what we sell on the website is Ghost Riders, then you're going to get it complete with the click track, because we want that rhythm driven to the back of the hall.
Okay. So now,
Do you remaster old ones?
Hang on, I'll take one.
so like modulation, does the bass ride the peak of that click, so that it just drives the bass up at that point?
So the interesting thing about that, because you talked about modulations, when you mod a piece of music, you don't want to mod, you do not want to modulate the rhythm, because that doesn't need to be, a drum beat does not need to change pitch.
No, I don't mean to change pitch, but you know, I'm talking about driving the volume up.
Oh, driving the volume up? We don't drive the volume up. The volume is steady. We only modulate keys. We don't modulate the volumes on it. Does that answer your question? Probably not. He's thinking. He's looking at me thinking. Hang on.
I can comment on the thing if you want.
Oh, okay. Go.
Mere fact that you have treble and bass into your ears, depending on your own personal ability to hear, will make the sound louder and softer to you. It isn't really there, but because of your hearing ability, sometimes when the notes are higher, you don't hear them at all. So it sounds like the music is softer when it really isn't. It's just high notes. It's all low notes, or it's a mixture. And as you're hearing this as a person, this makes the sound that you're hearing seem louder and softer when it really isn't.
Nobody
Well,
has a
I've
flat
got scopes
hearing,
and everything.
hearing
I can-
response.
Yes,
I can look at
exactly.
that sucker. I'll
Your
stop
low
it.
frequency response
So
is
that's
Volume
really
up
the
and
answer.
50
That's the answer.
decibels down. Yeah, just a regular human being.
Everybody, everything that's played, if it's played exactly the same volume, we don't hear it the same volume. Nobody
Okay.
does.
Yeah. I'll make a closing point on that, and I have to move on to the next question.
Yeah.
But we put that click track there on purpose, and when you have software that removes noise, it will almost always remove the click track, which
Is it just simple sine wave? Is it a square wave? Or what are you putting in?
is a simple sine wave. I couldn't tell you. All I know is that software removes it, and so if we. Okay, so at my own office, when I don't have a studio tape to work from, and we're going to take a piece of music from a record, if the record is the only source we have, there's a process that I follow, and the number one process is the record has to be brand new. If it came out of anybody's record case, I don't want to touch it. And the simple reason is because every record needle until about 10 years before record needles stopped being produced, before they stopped producing Hilton Audio, every record needle was an 89T type, and those needles were fat needles. And that means when they were fat needles, in order for them to go in the groove, it had to have a lot more weight placed on it. Because we had to produce records, and I know this for a fact, we had to if the record had a lot of bass and a lot of treble, it would cause the needle to skip. If you old timers remember, I Found a New Baby on Blue Star. When it first came out, it skipped. And what was Mac? What was it we used to do with our needles that skipped?
A quarter.
A quarter,
Or a nickel.
or a nickel, or we stack them on top of it. And guess what that did? It just gouged the edges right out of the groove. It was taking a square peg and shoving it right into the round hole, just as hard as you possibly can, and it scratched the whole record. And even if you didn't do that, it's still, every time you start playing a record, it scratched it. It took a little more out. So, going back to what I was saying, there are pieces of music that we put out where we had to come from a piece of vinyl. Oh, well, let's see if I've got it here. I don't think I've got it on my computer. We came from a piece of vinyl, and it was brand, so in many cases it's taken me years. It took me 5 years to find a brand new piece of Carolina in the Pines.
Oh, wow.
5 years to find that brand new record that had never ever been played. And once I had it, perfect, there's a process that involves wood glue, it involves days, it involves razor blades, and it involves a belt-driven turntable that has no hum through it, and I come out with a piece of music that is so pristine that you can't remove noise because there is no noise to remove. And then we take a kick drum and a click track and put it into the music. Beat at a time. 8 beats per line. 8 lines per stanza. 7 stanzas per record. That's what I do every time I put out a piece that came from vinyl. And we're doing it right now on a collection of hi-hat round dances because I just came into possession of that copyright authorization. So Tips of My Fingers. You know how hard it is to get a copy of Tips of My Fingers, Dialorali,
I have them all.
unplayed, never played, never put in anybody's, never put in the wild. I found them. It took a long time, and we've cleaned it, and we have got it down, and I am adding a kick drum and a click track to every single beat. So when you hear Dialorali played, the one where, Roses for Elizabeth, that's the one I just finished. You know how difficult it is to place a beat for every single, and I can tell you how many times that drummer slowed down and sped up.
The kick is just the big bass thing that's in the middle of the drum.
Correct. And we didn't see originally.
Did you use those?
Yeah, we never used kick drums. We're not a popular instrument up until the more recent times. And if you listen to every piece of modern music that you play right now, if you listen to Wagon Wheel, done by Darius Rucker, there's kick drum. It's there. It's what drives the rhythm. It's what drives the music. It's what drives everything. We've been here a lot longer than I thought. I'd like to take a break and then come back. Are we good with that?
Yes.
And we have to be out of here at what, 5?
We don't have to be.
No, we have to be out of here at 5. So let's take a break till 4:30, okay? 4:30. I'm sorry, I've kept you sitting a lot longer than anticipated. 4:30. Can we come back in, kids?
And I have a question I'll ask you all.
Okay.